Yo, what's good people? Welcome to another video. Today, we're gonna be talking about 808s. Now, as usual, this video was sponsored by Element Store. I actually made an 808 Serum preset pack for you guys with 40 presets that you can download for free if you click the link below or head over to Element Store. Now, if that doesn't deserve a like on the video, I don't know what does. Now guys, as usual, I have a preface for the video, and it is to not overthink your sub bass in 808s, because sometimes less is more, and you do not want a big, huge, harmonic, multi-band, saturated 808 that fills up the entire frequency spectrum. Chill, bro. Chill. If you listen to some good mixes, for example, some Skrillex stuff, some Tisoki stuff like that, sometimes it's actually only a very low sub bass that's operating like below 200 to 300 hertz. So maybe sometimes you actually just need to think about mixing your sub bass tight and not overly saturating and distorting your bass or 808s. Now also in this preface, I need to talk about the current landscape of the sample and preset industry. A lot of the 808 samples you are downloading, like these for example, are already heavily processed. And with that, I really need to state that sometimes if you already have an 808 sample where you can hear audible saturation or distortion, or you can actually tell from an EQ that it already has a lot of harmonics, you do not need to do any of the tips that you see in this video and other 808 videos. So if you use samples or maybe heavily processed presets, maybe just have a look at your 808 or sub bass in an analyzer to see how much harmonics, distortion, stuff like that you have. And that could be the judge of whether you should process your 808 more or actually just focus on subtractive EQ and compression and getting it sitting tight in your mix. Now with that said, let's move into the video. Time to level up, go! Okay, number one thing I want to talk about: harmonics, saturation, distortion, multi-band distortion, all that good stuff. Now let me give you guys an example of an 808 processed in different ways so you can actually hear these production techniques being used in practice. So here we have an example of some 808s. So first one, as you see here, is a raw 808 from a sine wave. In Serum, there is a little bit of drive on the filter, but that's just so you can actually hear it if you're listening to this video on laptop speakers. This one sounds like this. So yeah, very simple, very siney, not a lot of harmonics and stuff going on, and it would look like this through an EQ. So you can tell everything is kind of like below the 200-300 hertz range. Now this one is called Serum processing. I added a little bit of distortion and harmonics in Serum, and now the 808 looks like this. So you can tell there's a little bit more going on. It's a little bit more like thump to the 808. And if we were to go in Serum and add harmonics, a little bit of harmonics here, we add a distortion within the effects section, the 808 now sounds like this. So now you can see there are more harmonics on the frequency spectrum. We get a lot more mid-range information, which enables your 808 to be heard on laptop speakers, iPhones, all that good stuff. Now this is a very desirable effect that I almost always use on my 808s, especially because I'm an electronic producer. I do trap, I do EDM, I do hip hop, and with beats like that, you want the 808 and bass to be audible on smaller speaker systems. Now, to show you guys really how saturation and distortion works, I also did an example where I bounced out the 808 from Serum that you just heard, and I added more processing. So now I have the black box here on my 808 and a Pro Q3 just doing some dynamic EQing. And the 808 with the extreme processing sounds like this. So now you see we have a lot more information all of a sudden now. And this is a super heavy 808 that you hear in a lot of like trap stuff. So yeah, guys, that's a bit of an extreme example. You have a lot of options when it comes to distortion, saturation, multi-band distortion plugins. For the multi-band distortion, I like to go to FabFilter Saturn or something like a Decapitator from Soundtoys, which is a super good affordable plugin. but I usually go to the black box from Plugin Alliance because I am a subscriber to their yearly bundle thing. I have all of the plugins and I love the black box. You have a lot more options when it comes to distortion plugins. You can go for the stock distortion in your DAW, or you could just download some other plugins. There are a lot of dope distortion and saturation plugins that you can use to add more harmonics to your 808s. Time to level up, go! Now let me show you guys another example of how I process 808s in an actual track. Now this track is from my EP, it's called I Do featuring Drama B, and the drop sounds like this. Alright, so that's the drop. Let me just play you guys the basses in solo. Now, first off, we have an 808 that is essentially 2 sine waves. We do have a little bit of distortion and stuff going on here, some drive within the filters of Serum, so we already have harmonics coming out of Serum. Now, the way I process this is with a parallel compressor, EQ, low air from waves, just to add in a little bit more sub frequencies. I'm not a huge fan of this plugin at all, to be honest, but gets the job done. Now, we do have the aforementioned black box for the saturation. The mix is on 48%, and I added some saturation, and the pento knob is a little bit above 50%. This saturation frequency is set to flat, meaning that it actually saturates the entire frequency spectrum. And we have an EQ, just to take out a little bit of that high end that we created with the saturation. We have this one that's actually sidechaining to the drums. And then we have solid dynamics and a kickstart that we automated so it only comes in some part. I know this sounds a little bit complex, but that is the 808 and it sounds like this. So yeah, as you can tell, you already have a lot of harmonics and saturation going on. However, for a track like this, where you want the bass to sound really heavy, you want more layers. So I have a mid layer, which as you can tell is ridiculously processed and distorted, but also low cutted up to 150 hertz, meaning that I use this bass to add a lot of mid-range, and it sounds like this. Yeah, so it adds that like thickness in the mid-range, which enables you to hear it on an iPhone speaker, for example. I also have a wide layer that I'm not going to be talking too much about. It's basically just for the perception of a wide drop that I have this layer in. It's really low in the mix. It's kind of like a super sorry sound, but together they sound really good. This was obviously a very extreme example, but I hope you guys get the point. We use saturation and multiband distortion to create harmonics in your basses, and we use layers to create width and a sense of a bigger sound overall. Time to level up, go! So the second thing I want to talk about is textures, layers, effects. Now, before I dive in too deep on texture, layers, effects, stuff like that, I do want to say that you should watch out when you do effects on your basses, because you can end up with some weird phasing issues. You can basically cancel out some of the low end. It'll make your mix sound like shit. I always do effects on separate tracks and separate layers and low cut them, so I know I don't have interference with my sub bass. Now, the first example of texture and layers is from my track Like This from my EP, where we have a chorus effects verb weird type layer on the bass, and it sounds like this. Just tell me where it's at. Just tell me where it's at. Now, the second example I want to show you guys is from an upcoming track of mine, And it's a very extreme example of 808 and bass effects and textures. Now the drop sounds like this.
I'ma keep this shit bumping till I pass out. I'ma keep this shit bumping, keep this shit bumping till I pass out.
Jesus Christ. Anyway, guys, so the bass in the drop is very, very effects. Now, I think of this track as a very producery track. I want producers to listen to this at live shows and go, oh! So the 808s sound like this. So a lot of weird stuff going on. You hear some audible bit crush in like the 10, 15K frequencies. Basically, we have a main bass that's already bit crushed and sound like this. We have a layer which has isotope trash on it and sounds like this. Creating some weird harmonics. Then we have a ring mod layer, which has a lot of like metallic effects on it in like the infiltrator from Devious Machines. So essentially, we're getting that resonance around the 400 to 500 hertz range, which we hear in a lot of current bass music. Now, obviously, this wasn't enough because I was in a very producery mood. So I bounced out all the 808s and ran them through the plugin called Texture from Devious Machines. And when you run an 808 through the Texture plugin, which by the way looks like this, you can basically turn an 808 into organic sounds, into risers, into effects, into background layers, and that's what I did. So I bounced out the 808, ran it through Texture and bounced it out again so I could actually clip, cut, and fade the files to match. So the layers on the 808 sounds like this. We have another one here. Ooh. So a lot of like let me just play the 808 and the textures together. So this is a very extreme example of a very, very heavily processed 808 with a lot of layers. Now, I would never encourage anyone to do stuff like this, but it does create a very fat sounding drop. Because this is the main lead of the drop, besides some high-end like lasery synthy stuff. So this is like filling up the entire low and mid-range, basically.
Time to level up, go!
Thing we want to talk about today is sidechain, attack, fades, stuff like that to blend your 808 with your kick. Now, I would always encourage you guys to use 808 samples without clicks/kicks in them, so you can basically process the kick in 808 differently. That also enables you to either sidechain your 808 to a kick, fade your 808 sample to your kick, or basically automate like I do the 808 to my kick. Now, if you watch any of my old production videos, you would see that I do the traditional thing of sidechaining an 808 through a compressor to my kick. Now, while that is a viable option, which can get you pretty decent results, sometimes you will have clicking from the compressor or the plugin, especially in trap stuff like this where the kicks are not like 4x4 straight. So I opted for a more perfectionist kind of style when I sidechain my 808s. What I do now is I actually volume automate, as you can see, each 808 to my kick. Now, while that gives me full control, it also enables me to do different curves on the actual sidechain, different lengths of sidechain to the kick, depending on what effects I'm going for, which I really love. Now, as you will see here, basically I have the 808 sitting on a group where the volume is sidechained to the kick and automated. So every time the kick hits, the volume dips down to 0. Creating that very exaggerated sidechain. I actually also do this in more like R&B, hip-hop type project because it creates a very cool effect that people associate with your track banging, basically. You actually can also achieve a louder result when it comes to mastering if you have your kick and 808 operating independently and sidechaining like this. And that's basically what I have to say about sidechaining and attack and fading your 808s and blending them with your kick. Now, I do want to say that you don't always have to sidechain your 808s to your kick. In some instances, for example, like a very heavy hip-hop rap, it is a cool effect to have a more minimal kick and then have the 808 fill up the entire spectrum, so you don't have it sidechained. That could create a very cool and heavy sounding effect in your beats. So sometimes, maybe don't try to sidechain your 808 and see how it goes, depending on what kind of sound you're going for. Now, in most electronic music, I would always encourage you guys to sidechain your 808 to your kicks.
Time to level up, go!
Now, tip number 4 here to level up your 808 is a small one, but very essential. If you do music production where you want it to bounce, I love the effect of having glides and swoops and stuff like that in your 808s. So for example, in this bumping track, I have the 808 going from the root note to a very weird pitchy pattern where it goes. Now, if you own any of my older sample packs, you could also find a lot of them just by typing in swoop. And I did a lot of stuff like this. If you do this like right before a kick or something, it could create a very cool effect. For example, if you hear a lot of the UK drill stuff, you have a lot of like 808 glides where it goes stuff like that in the middle of a track, which creates a super cool and very producery sounding effect, to be honest. So basically, just play more with glides, swoops, pitch bends, effects, stuff like that. So guys, that's gonna be it for this video on how to level up your 808s. Now, while I do have a lot more tips for 808s, I felt like these were the essential, and I do not want to overcomplicate 808s because it is a very simple thing in your production. Basically, if you caught the point of this video, it is to pick the right samples or presets so you don't have to do a lot of processing. Honestly, that's the key to good 808s. And mix it tight with your kick in your main lead, depending on what type of lead you have in your track. You want to mix your 808 accordingly to that. Now, as I said in the beginning, this video is sponsored by Element Store, and I made a free 808 serum preset pack for you guys with 40 presets. So of course, click the link down below or head over to Element Store and download it. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Level Up. We have a lot more to come. See you in the next one, guys. Click a like on the video. Peace.
Time to level up, go!